Hello and welcome to Startup Sessions. Today we have Gauthier, the CEO and founder of Perlego. I'm really excited to have him as a guest. There are lots of things to talk about and a lot of things that I'm curious to learn from him. So welcome, Gauthier.
Thanks for having me.
So I think it is wise to start with your personal story and what has led you to this position today. I'm really curious about that.
Sure. So I'm from Belgium originally. And when I was a kid, I had a business that sold notebooks, which worked pretty well. And then when I was at university, I've always had something for entrepreneurship. I had a small hoodie company. Basically, we had identified that a lot of students wanted hoodies from their university. We built up a small company that worked pretty well. And then from that, we got enough cash to build Perlego. So Perlego was actually built as one of my own pain points. So when I was at university, I was buying expensive textbooks. I always use the example that I was buying an accounting book worth over £200. I'd read 2 chapters of the book and never use it again. And I was looking at the industry and I thought, look, surely when it comes to textbooks, you never really want to own a textbook. You just want to access the textbook. So I was looking at companies like Spotify for music, Netflix for movies, and I thought, you know what, a subscription service for digital textbooks could work really, really well. So we launched the company in September 2016. We launched the product in January 2017, and we're now just over 30 in the team. So it's been pretty exciting 18 months since we launched.
I mean, there's definitely something really interesting going on about how you built that business. Usually lots of professional, I think this is true in sports, in music, people who are really good at what they do make it look easy. And it is, I know it's not always easy to find the right product market fit, to understand the solution, to find the pain point. Focusing on your own pain points is always a good place to start. But so I want to focus on that. Before we do that, did you always have in mind to be an entrepreneur or to start a startup, or did you have any other callings before you went into all these?
Yeah, so I always I studied economics, business, and management at university, and the right thing to do when you finish university is get a good job at a consultancy or at a bank. And to be honest, I tried going into the banking sector, but I really didn't like it. I noticed that for me, working in a big organization where you feel just like a cog in a machine, it really didn't work for me. And the entrepreneurial flair came from the creativity from what you can build. So for me, if I don't have the creativity of being able to implement new marketing strategies or new ways to build products, then I feel like my job doesn't have much of a purpose or a sense. So it's very important for me to build things that excite me. And I think entrepreneurship is a channel that allows me to do that.
I see, it makes perfect sense. So what do you think of the maker movement these days?
Which movement, sorry?
The maker movement. I mean, I do love the term maker because it is just overarching and it's very broad. But the problem with that can be that it is very broad. Do you think you share a certain maker ethos, or do you see as something that is not really related to what you do?
So yeah, I believe making is super important. So something I say to everyone in the team, everyone has hundreds of ideas, right? But an idea means nothing. Execution is where the real value is derived. So, I think execution is one of the most important things you need to do as a startup founder. Because look, when you say a Spotify for textbooks, I'm sure hundreds of people have had the idea. The only difference between the person who's had the idea and where I am today is I've been executing every single day to realize that vision.
That's true. I mean, it is really important. In one of the businesses that we built with the co-founder I had, an inspiration point for us was Adam Grant's book, The Originals. It's the last book about entrepreneurship, but indeed it is really very closely tied to what you just said, in the sense that many artists, many creative people, for example, take Beethoven, take Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, those people created a lot of stuff. I mean, it was all about execution. And uh, Adam Grant's point in the book is you don't necessarily know which one is your best creation, but all you can do is to keep iterating and creating. And I think there are some parallels of that in the world of entrepreneurship and startups, as you just said.
For sure. I think you should have seen the first version of Perlego. It was absolutely ugly and it didn't look like much, but at least we got something through the door, right? I see a lot of first-time founders and they don't want to launch their products until it's absolutely perfect. The reality is your product never will be perfect, so get it to market as fast as possible and learn from as fast as possible. So I think an absolutely beautiful product or platform or business comes from iterating every single day. So the feedback loop, get it out as fast as you can and get as much feedback as you can, because that's going to how you're going to learn the most.
I think it is a really interesting business model, what you're doing. So it might be really meaningful to talk a bit more about the mission you are on as Perlego.
Fantastic. So our mission at Perlego is to build the world's online learning library. But more importantly, we want to make educational content accessible to everyone. Part of that, accessibility means making sure you create an effective learning environment where people can study effectively. So when we started Perlego, we thought, great, we'll put the books on the platform and students will learn. But actually what you need to do is create an environment where you help them to learn. So this simple space where they can find all their core books, where they can highlight the most important bits, they can reference. It's about building tools to allow students to study in a less stressed environment and in a much smarter way. So, for example, one of the stresses we remove is carrying all your textbooks to university or not finding the respective textbooks you need for your class. With Perlego, you find everything in one simple space, and you can see everything you highlighted and annotated before. So that's kind of, in short,
that's really good. I mean, this is just a specific question, but do people have access to their learning materials after their subscription ends, or is it tied to that? How does that work actually?
So right now, if you lose your subscription, if you don't continue to pay, we will keep saving your content. So if you resubscribe, you can re-see your highlights and your annotations.
Fantastic. And what was it about this business and this mission and not something else? Because I'm sure as an entrepreneur, this was not the only problem that you've experienced. There were other possible venues for your creative energy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So I think for me, it's when you're a founder, when you're an entrepreneur, you look at the market. And first of all, I believe like the best companies are companies that are addressing huge problems. This is a huge problem. You've got 252 million students worldwide, of which more than 60% don't even get access to textbooks. To give you an example, the unit economics of textbook publishing don't work for Central Africa because getting a print book out there is very, very expensive. So for me, first of all, the mission and the problem statement is very important, but then also to look at the market dynamics. So when we were analyzing the platform, like how we could build Perlego, we noticed that the 3-4 major publishers had all seen their revenue decline over the past few years. And the reason was because students were downloading books illegally or they would buy books secondhand. So you've got a huge problem for students where the books are too expensive, but there's also a huge problem for publishers where they are not finding efficient ways to get the content in front of the students. And so our solution is a streaming service where you prevent piracy from happening and you provide affordability to the end user.
This is really interesting, and I mean, there's a certain parallel of what you're doing to lots of streaming services, especially in video and Netflix. I remember seeing a meme in the dark corners of the internet a few days ago, and it was just this comic that the guy was getting the dust off his black hat and started going into pirating movies again because Netflix and other platforms have fragmented so much that it was essentially getting very difficult to find what people want to watch at the same time. So I think it is really interesting. The way the internet is built is based on free sharing of knowledge. It is basically costless to replicate something other than your server and data costs. So it is really free in that sense. what it is also people also do want commercial products that are well priced and provide a great convenience. And it is just always very interesting to me how the black, as I'll say, just as a rough reference, of internet and piracy push other commercial services to become more mature, and that's something that was very difficult to see in textbooks, I would presume. But as you've made very clear, there is a sort of relationship between the way people reach what they want to reach and the commercial side of the businesses. Do you think that is the case? And do you think how do you think these two forces of markets, the commercial and the white hat versus the black hat sides of the internet, how do you think they interact with each other in markets like these?
Yeah, so if we look at movies, for example, one of the big problems right now is we're having small aggregators. So you've got Netflix, then you've got Disney, you've got Hulu. Everyone's doing their own platform. So we had aggregation sort of 5-6 years ago, and because everyone's seeing it as an exciting opportunity, everyone's segmenting the market to specific niches. Again, I believe the way that industry is going is you'll have an aggregator where you can find your Netflix, your Hulu in one simple space, and I'm sure that will arrive in the next few years. Talking about the textbook industry specifically, for us, there were three kind of, or two core factors where a subscription service makes sense. As a student, you're moving away from an ownership model. By that is you don't need to own the textbook for 15 years. You just need to consume the content. The second reason why I think we are seeing quite a significant amount of success is by building a multi-publisher solution, so having books from several different publishers, you can reach new growth by targeting those price-sensitive audiences that would not buy the book in the first place. So to give you an example, your student who buys your print textbook will most probably still buy their print textbook. However, the student who is not really interested in buying the book will probably use a platform like Perlego because it's much more convenient for them. And then the third factor, which I think is quite important, in our industry, and the one I'm working in right now, you never read a book from A to Z, or like,
That's true.
A movie, you're going to watch the whole movie. In textbook publishing, you're going to read 2 chapters here, 3 chapters there, and 4 chapters there. So this sub-bundling of content is quite efficient for us because it means publishers can monetize every single user, even if they just read 1 page of their content.
That's actually a great point. Yeah, because you cannot buy a chapter of a book. You have to buy the whole book, and you don't need the book for years, and you just need it for a semester. It ticks a lot of boxes. One thing I meant to ask you is, so there is a motto that I really like, which is good startups are easy to communicate but hard to replicate. Do you think Perlego fits within that framework? If so, why is that?
Yeah, so I think the communication of our message is very simple, a subscription service for digital textbooks. Very hard to replicate because our competitive barriers are our relationships created with our suppliers. And it takes an awful lot of time to create trust and credibility in an industry, but also it takes a lot of time for your partners to support you in what's quite a disruptive model. And then I think other ways where we will be hard to copy is scale of users, brand. So the brand we've built resonates very well with our market. And then our mission. A lot of people are bought into Perlego's mission and love what we're doing. So right now we're not perfect, but they don't mind because we've got a great mission and they support us either way.
Segueing to a more personal level, trying to understand how you operate, and especially how the business operates in that. The question I have is, do you use any mental models or heuristics to discipline your thinking? If you do, how do they work with making tough calls, hard decisions? How does your mind work essentially when you're trying to make important decisions for the company? And what are the roles of mental models within that? That's one thing I'd really like to hear about.
Sure. So I think when it comes to the decisions in the company, right now, I would say actually 90% of the decisions within the day-to-day running of Perlego are done by the team. So I think as a founder, the most important thing you can do is surround yourself by great people. People who work in your team, people who invest in you, and people who help you or mentor you. When it comes to difficult decisions, and this is maybe a bad thing, but I often follow my gut, and my gut to date has helped me quite a lot. But I also talk to a lot of people around me saying, look, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I try and learn from entrepreneurs who've failed before, or I can learn from, and that helps me in my reasoning. But yeah, I think as a founder now, it's taking only the hard decisions, and the day-to-day decisions are executed by the team.
I see. And do you use any mental models like heuristics or any reminders to increase your quality of decisions, or is it just something that comes naturally?
Right now, it's more natural. I am trying to learn different frameworks and discipline my thinking a bit more. But unfortunately, with the hectic sort of days at Perlego, you don't really have the time, right? So it is something I'm trying to use more. But do you use anything like that? Do you use any mental frameworks?
I mean, I try to use, there are a few. For example, one for me is to focus on product market founder fit, as opposed to just looking at product market fit. Because it just, when the founder and their skills fit within what they're building, it's actually a huge competitive advantage. And there are a few that I do use, which actually work in my case. But one of them, which is actually related to what you've just said in terms of using gut feeling or intuition, is I think Paul Graham of Y Combinator puts that very succinctly. I mean, he says intuition is very good on the domains that you have a good sample of knowledge about. For example, if you have hired, in my case, I've done a lot of recruitment, hiring decisions, did over 3,000 interviews. So sometimes my gut intuition can work because I've done that so many times. But in an area that I know very little about, I'd be very careful about trusting my intuition. For example, I don't know how to. For example, let's say I don't know how to drive a motorcycle. If I was trying to learn that for the first time, I wouldn't trust my intuition on how to brake or how to accelerate. So I think that's one of the heuristics that work really well, because it just disciplines your decision making in which areas you have to trust your gut and in which areas you have to actually ignore your gut and look at the data, be very analytical, ask the opinions and advice of other people.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
So what is it something that you think entrepreneurs are getting wrong in trying to build their business or choosing their strategy based on your observation?
Right now, around the founders I see around me?
Yeah. I'm especially in the context of London. I presume you're having conversations with a number of people. Some of them are really successful, some of them are not. Do you see a general trend of what people get wrong as entrepreneurs or as founders when they're trying to build their businesses?
Yeah, I think a lot. I think first of all, the best founders and the most impressive entrepreneurs are founders or entrepreneurs that are product driven. Product and mission driven, who are not at all financial driven. So if you're becoming an entrepreneur to make money, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be a success, because it's going to be harder than any other job you've ever experienced, and you need to be completely committed and passionate about what you do. So mistakes I've seen a lot is people trying to take shortcuts. By shortcuts, I mean like hiring people who are not a good fit. So from my own perspective, again, I keep saying it, but amazing people really make the difference in a great company. So I'd say, yeah, just don't try and take shortcuts. And then the second thing I would say is don't build a business just to build a business. Build a business because you're trying to solve a problem, because that's something you can buy into. Has that kind of answered your question?
It does, but I'd like to hear your thoughts more about on what you mean by shortcuts. If you have any example in your mind, that would be fantastic as well.
Yeah, so I'll get some shortcuts on the products. So myself included, the first few weeks at Perlego, we didn't take a designer because we thought it'd be expensive. But actually, by taking a shortcut of not using a designer and saving costs for a month or two, after a few weeks, we had to bring a designer who had to start from scratch. So do things properly from the beginning, because they'll always catch up on you afterwards. Another example you could say in a shortcut is potentially hiring people slightly junior. So you think, great, I'll get someone who's quite young, not too expensive, but that actually costs you a lot of time to skill up that person to become a relevant player in your team.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, your approach is to build to last, build to scale. Do not make very short-term decisions, but rather focus on what's going to create value in the long term as well. Is that a correct way of putting that?
Completely. It's much harder when you're raising funds and you're trying to please both your team members, your investors. But in the long term, it's about creating a sustainable big business than than having some quick short wins.
You know what? Something I've been really thinking about for the last couple of months is the role of timing in launching a business. I think it is something that is very easy to get wrong, because the general consensus, the layman's understanding of this is when you're building a business, it is very good to be the first one. You have to be the first one to think of that idea and to actually implement that. The general public understanding tends to favor being too early to market. On the other hand, there are lots of problems with being too late to market, in the sense that you got bigger and tougher competition. It's just harder to differentiate. Problems are solved. And going back to that, one of the heuristics mental models that I love is newer problems have newer solutions and older problems have older solutions. So a lot of the things that are open, new spaces that are opening up in how technology works, it has to do with the new problems that are in turn created by the use of those technologies as well. But I should not digress. I mean, my question is, with regards to timing, in launching Perlego, how did you approach this? How did you make the call to say, okay, this is not too early, this is not too late, this is the right timing to focus on a business like this? Or on the other hand, it might entirely be the case that you never thought about that, and it just was something that you inherently thought was the right timing. What was the case there? 17 hours.
Yeah, I think timing is absolutely everything. So for me, in Perlego's industry, someone had tried to do something in 2011. Unfortunately, the publishers weren't right for this. They weren't ready to adopt a subscription model.
That's really interesting.
I actually think Perlego, from our perspective, we might have been six months to a year too early. I think the timing is now, and we've seen this in the movement in the space. We see major publishers doing their own subscription products. I think all innovators will probably be a year and a half too early, but they're a year and a half too early because they have to get their message out to the market, and they have to be the first mover. So I do believe the first mover advantage is the one usually that wins or has the most recognition from the market. A good example you could say is Uber against a Lyft. Uber is a much bigger company because they did it first. So I do think there's a lot of advantage being the first mover. In our industry specifically, it's absolutely massive because the publishers have heard from us first, and so they're like, okay, if we work with one person, we're going to work with the player who's been doing it from the beginning.
I mean, I get that, but there are a lot of difficulties that come with being the first in the market, right? With the disadvantages and with the difficulties of being the first mover in the market. What were they?
Yeah, you're the scary player on the block, right? So the first time we went to see a publisher, they said, never, we don't like this. And then sort of 6 months after, once they got comfortable with it, we got their whole content. But yeah, you scare a lot of people, to be honest, because you're trying to be disruptive. And for us, we're trying to be disruptive, but also helpful to our partners to bring the industry back to growth.
Being too early sucks, being too late sucks. You have to strike the right balance and watch for timing. And what you just said about, if I have not misheard you, that the idea of launching something like Perlego is not something that is only 2 or 3 years old, but it all goes back to 2011. That's what you said, right?
Yeah. Look, everyone has had. The number of people I've talked to saying, oh, I thought that was going to exist when I was at university. Why did it take so long? I think a lot of people have tried it. And that also comes a bit when it comes to entrepreneurship. You need an element of luck. And the biggest element of luck you make yourself. But I think timing is the biggest bit of unknown luck you can get as an entrepreneur.
Do you think Because I think this is really important. Do you think there's a way to at least gauge if you're at the proximity of the right timing zone? At least it is very difficult to pinpoint that exactly. But my question is, not knowing the years, how do you know, in the case of Perlego, just to take it as an example, how do you know it is 2016 or 2017 and not 2011 when you're the guy, when you're the person who's trying to build that and don't have the perfect market knowledge at your fingertips?
Yeah, so for us, the way we managed to see that it was because on a macro level, we looked at the industry. So the industry was in despair because the revenues of all the publishers were declining and piracy was going through the roof. So piracy has been growing 28% year on year since 2012. In 2011, piracy hardly existed and the publishers were all still doing great, right? So if the major publishers are having a great time, they don't need to disrupt or change their model because it's working well for them, it's working well for their shareholders, and overall it's working well for their share price. But if no student is buying books anymore and everyone's getting them illegally, or look, we're a solution to the industry, it's something you can't hide away from anymore.
So it is, a heuristic for that. Maybe look at the real struggles, the real pain, the real pain points of the players in the industry you're operating. You said despair and growth of piracy, publishers in pain. So I think those are the good indicators that increase the chance of saying, okay, this might just be the right time for this. Yeah. Just segueing to another topic from here, again following my own genuine curiosity about the matter, while I have the chance to ask you these questions. One online debate that I have been a small part of it was about a question. It was from an entrepreneur, and they were trying to decide whether it was the right move to go straight out of university and build a business or start working in a large organization. So what do you think? Because I think you're at a very interesting point to answer this question, as Perlego is about textbooks and is about so it is a part of your life. How big of a role do you think formal education plays in becoming a great entrepreneur, and how do you think that is going to change in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to answer your first question, I think you should always get on and go and do it. So if you never tried, you never know what you like and what works for you. So for example, when I worked in a big group, I realized that I really didn't like it. Then I found my way back doing a company. It's something I love, and even if you don't pay me, I'll still do it, right? So I think it's super important to do what you love, and if you don't know what it's like building up a company, at least you can try, because honestly, you've got nothing to lose. I see a lot of people around me who are like, no, I'm scared because I might fail. For me, there is no failure, because even if your company fails, you will have learned so much more of how to build up a business, how to start things. That's a learning experience in itself, and you could call that an MBA in itself.
That's true.
I do think education is important. Formal education specifically, as it acts as the base point for you to grow yourself. So, to give you an example, I learned accounting, I learned finance, I learned management. All those things are the theoretical aspects, but then doing a business is actually the practical aspects. So think about education as reading a book on how to play football, and then actually playing football is the way how you improve yourself. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a weird analogy.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, you cannot learn how to ride a bicycle by reading a book. You have to actually go out and do that. You obviously had a great education. I mean, at Bocconi and then at Cambridge. What do you think you would be missing? I know this is a tough question to ask, but still, what do you think you would be missing if you hadn't had the opportunity to go to school at those places?
I think the network. So the network of other, so for example, one of my colleagues studied at Bocconi with me, and another colleague studied at Cambridge. So the network you create by going to university helps you a lot. And I think that's the most important thing.
It's really interesting. And of course, there is a flip side to that, isn't there? For lots of, so I've been going around meeting a lot of different people from different backgrounds in London, and networking and knowing the right people is a huge part of it in every business, not just in becoming an entrepreneur or in the world of startups, but in any business. Doesn't this serve as a barrier to entry to so other people who haven't had the opportunity to actually go to renowned places. What do you think about that? And if you think that is the case, is there actually a way to overcome that? Can you build the type of relationships, the network that you gain at university? Is there a way to make up for it? What do you think about that?
For sure. I think a good entrepreneur makes his own network. So to give you an example, Perlego, even though it's not my first company, it's my first venture capital, first company that's received investment. Now, when I started this when I was 24, so, I knew no one. I didn't know any investors. I didn't know any high net worth individuals. But if you've got the confidence, the grit, the hustle, and the passion, you'll find the people you need. And that's just by doing emails. It's just so a fun stat I always give to first-time founders is, look, for 18 no's, you get a yes. So a lot of people go, I tried to raise venture capital, I tried to raise angel funding, but they stop after 5 no's. It's 18 no's for 1 yes. So you need to talk to an awful lot of people, get through a lot of doors to get through that. So I think university gives you credibility. So people see that you've done a good university, that helps you to gain credibility to get money, but it shouldn't be an end to itself. I think the best founders probably haven't gone to university and build amazing companies because they just have the confidence to do it.
Well, that's very interesting that you say that. A very big part of building a business goes through finding the right people, and that's something you mentioned by saying 90% of the decisions don't go through me. It's team decision is actually surrounding yourself with a high caliber, high quality set of people, and this is something that I really personally feel which is very valuable, as it is the core topic of my last book, Startups Grow with People. It's about how to actually tell a good co-founder from a bad one. A bad co-founder can be the worst thing for many businesses. And I've seen lots of startups fail, mostly because founders cannot get along, even though there was a good product market fit and they were individually good, but they just didn't know how to work together. So with those in mind, I'm really curious, how did that first layer of collaborations begin in your case?
Yeah, so I'm of the belief that people are good at several things and there's no point of being a generalist. So for example, I'm a very bad coder. So what we did was I found actually a friend from school who I've known for a very long time. He's the co-founder of the business, Matthew Davis. And since I've known him since the age of 14, and he was a great coder. He was a perfect complementary skill set to my skill set. We said, hey, why don't we build this business together? I focus on the fundraising, the hiring, the more business side of things. You build up the product. So I actually think nowadays, if you don't have a co-founder, it's going to be very hard to raise money, simply because you need to be able to offload some of the weight and the pressure, but also you need to have focus in what you do. So there's no point of me trying to code up the website whilst I try and bring on investors. So you do need, I'd say, minimum 1 co-founder. And I think the perfect balance is to be 3 in a founding team.
And again, this is a tough question to ask. I know that, but how did you know that Matt was a potential for a good co-founder?
You don't. You've got to go again a bit with your gut, right? Yeah. It's difficult, and I think if we were to look at reasons why companies fail, the first reason is lack of founding team. So when times get tough, the founders fight and the company dissolves. We've had some very tough times, but we've always been driven on the same mission and we understand each other very well. So it's about finding someone you trust and who's a complement to your skill set. And I think that is probably the hardest bit to kickstart your business, is finding someone good. So either look in the network you have before, but that is the hardest bit when I'd say to start things off is finding a great co-founder.
I do agree with that. Sometimes I ask when I'm speaking to a number of people, would you choose a very good business idea or a very good founder? And the answers are really interesting. I mean, if you get the chance, please do try that when you have a chance to speak to a large group. Because what I've found out is that certain types of people who have actually built a business or failed at building a business, who have just lived through the difficulties of that, 100% they say I would pick a good co-founder rather than a good idea, because good ideas are still sometimes manageable. But again, the common understanding seems to be around the fact that a good idea is much more important than finding good people. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that?
I disagree. I think good people can make an amazing business, whilst an amazing idea does not necessarily make a. Let's put it this way.
Oh yeah, we agree then. That's my point exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Amazing,
it is difficult to
yeah,
find. It is harder to find good people rather than a good idea, is what I'm trying to say.
for sure. No, for sure. And that's why you as a founder, and I think the primary role as a founder is to find great talent. That's it. And I think as angel investors, you invest in great talent, because things are always going to go haywire and you're always going to have tough times and it never goes to plan. But if you have amazing people, the long game, the long-term execution will definitely be there.
So what are some of the things that you look at while making talent recruitment decisions?
So I look for passion, first of all. I think passion, optimism is super important in an early stage company. So someone who has the hunger to take things on, okay? That's, I think, the most important thing, a hunger to learn, and more importantly, a hunger to fail. So when we hire people from big companies, they're very scared to fail, because they feel that if they fail, their boss will get angry. One of our cultures at Perlego is to be failing fast and a lot. If you're not failing, you're not pushing yourself. And so as a result, you're not bringing value to the company. So someone who's not afraid to fail, someone who's optimist, someone who's hungry to learn. And then honestly, I also think someone who wants to grow and is very ambitious. The correlation of success in a startup is very, very hard. So if you don't have that hunger and that ambition, maybe a startup isn't the best place for you to accelerate your career or your life goals. You need an awful lot of ambition. Yeah, those I think are the most important ones. And then other things are, for example, resilience. And actually, I really like transparency and honesty. So a lot of interviews, people are selling themselves, and I ask them, hey, what is the biggest failure? What have you learned the most from your recent failures or something? And it's very interesting the kind of questions you get back. People who are confident are not afraid to say, oh, I failed here, here, and here. People who lack confidence often deny having failed at anything.
The only thing that I think complicates what you just said, I mean, hiring for passion, resilience, tolerance for ambiguity, I think I wholeheartedly agree that these are the top things to look at while hiring for a startup. And the complication with that, I found out is some people not having gone through essentially different types of experience think that they are really passionate, but they don't necessarily have a test of their own resilience, their own passion. Let me try to give an example to that. Someone comes up and says, hey, I'm a very passionate climber. I can just send that route. I can just climb that mountain because I'm very passionate. On the other hand, there is someone who has actually done that and says that I'm really passionate after having gone through that difficult endeavor of doing that. And it is not always easy to tell which is which. Do you have any shorthand? Do you have any suggestions or any tactics that you use to try to differentiate the people that simply say that they are passionate versus the people who have actually gone through a certain type of challenge and proven themselves, first of all, that they're really passionate about something, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I think passionate people will find a way to make it work within your organization. I'll give you a great example. People who are very passionate about joining Perlego will email me directly, will email the help channel and be like, look, I really need to work here for this reason. People who are not so passionate don't know what they want, and they just want to join a cool company. So I think you can determine passionate directly by the way that people talk to you and the way they approach potentially joining your company. So a very passionate person will say, look, I don't care if it's sales, business development, or finance. I just want to be here and learn, and I'll grow into my specific role later. People who are less passionate will just say, look, I only want to do marketing and I only want to do this. They're a bit more selfish in their thinking, in their careers against the company.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. I want to segue to how you manage growth, and this is going to be my second to last question. In trying to understand how you managed the different life cycles each startup goes through. So before that, how many employees do you have in total at Perlego?
So now we're just about to hit employee number 30.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that is definitely a quite maturing state of the business, and there are some different aspects to that growth. One of them is the tech stack, the technology solutions and tools that the company uses. Um, are there any tools, favorite tools that you have liked to use or have been indispensable in growing your business? That's one thing I want to ask. And my second question will be, and you can answer them together or just one by one, is the other side of growth, essentially the people strategy and culture, and how your culture conversations, how your people conversations, management conversations have changed and evolved as the company has grown from 5 to 10 to 30 people.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to tooling, I think one of the most helpful things for us was building everything on a cloud infrastructure. So platforms like AWS or Microsoft's equivalent. By doing that, you can scale up your tech stack quite quickly, right? So you can go from 20,000 users to 200,000 users without having too much implication on your business when it comes to the product side of things. When it comes to the culture side of things, you grow as a founder with your company. So in the early days, it was all of us sitting in a room together. We were getting our hands dirty. The culture was essentially the people who were working there. Now the culture is through our brand values and our cultural handbook and the way we hire people. So I think culture is determined by the people you hire, and that's it. And then, of course, through you as a founder. I don't think you can enforce culture, but you can hire for culture.
You just mentioned the cultural handbook. What is that, and what does it include?
Yeah, so our cultural handbook is kind of the 6 values we work by. So transparency, always be learning and failing, try and help others, be positive, optimistic. It's kind of the blueprint of the people you want as a team member. But also, like, if someone joins, that they understand, okay, these are the kind of 6 values at Perlego. If I failed, no worries. At least I've learned something from it.
And how did you actually? When did you? Very interesting, because usually lots of companies start focusing on culture at a later stage, right? And what I can tell definitely is that you are very early to do that, which is a very good thing. When did you first start the first iteration of this? And I called it a culture playbook, by the way, but it's essentially the same thing I think you're talking about. So when did you first start building that playbook, that culture book?
When we hit employee number 18, I think the most important thing to do is actually make sure your culture is perfect from the core, because it's like if you have one bagged egg in a small team, then that's going to spread. So you need to make sure that your core team, and from the early days, your culture is defined and set. Because once we scale to 100 or 150 people, we want to make sure we maintain that culture. And the only way you do that is to make sure that the core employees who've been with you from the beginning transfer that to the people they hire. So I think it's very important.
I agree with that. I mean, that honestly, I'm so glad that you are taking such an approach, because it is really important, and it is a certain point of change in the general startup landscape, in the appreciation of culture and managing. So essentially, I sometimes think the founders' jobs as managing complexity. You manage complexity from the user side, the client side, the technology, and also a big pillar of that is essentially managing complexity of the people within the organization. And if you cannot get that right, the company definitely fails. It doesn't fail very immediately, but it definitely fails as soon as it hits employee number 30 or 50 and in that range. So it is really inspiring to hear you talk about that. And with that, I'd really like to hear your thoughts as a final talking point about the future of the streaming industry and how user traits are changing, how we interact with content. And I have a specific question related to that, which is obviously I've had the experience of using, for example, Amazon in the books that I've self-published, and it is actually a really interesting marketplace. in the sense that it has a lot of power on the user experience, on which type of customers reach which type of content and all that. So I was just looking at Perlego and thinking, how would this landscape change if tomorrow a giant like Amazon decided to go into this space? So I mean, there are other questions within that topic, but that was just one example of the types of possible talking topics about the change in industry for the future. So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that, if you have any, about the future direction of this industry and the streaming and content as a service type of industry in the future.
Yeah, I think the power of streaming is the data you can collect from your users. You know all the metrics on usage, on most popular content, most popular titles. So I think the fact that you own your users or you own your end consumer is very powerful. When it comes to, let's say, if a player like Amazon come into this, I believe that the best companies do one thing well. So for us, it's building a beautiful online learning experience, which will be through textbooks and solutions. Amazon do a bit of everything. And if they were to execute on something like a textbook reading platform, it would most probably be integrated with Amazon Prime. You'd have movies around it. So if you do one thing really, really well, and you see that in everything, people will continue to use you. The best companies do one thing and one thing very well. So for example, Amazon tailored the needs to their users very well. But if they were to integrate a textbook reading platform into Amazon Prime, it would create complexity and confusion to their value proposition. On Perlego, you know exactly what we can do, and we can do things very, very well, which is building a beautiful reading and learning experience. And that is our core focus. So we will invest our time on building better tools, better products. So I think the niche segmentation of specific content does allow you to build a huge global business. As you've seen it with music, right? And as you see it with other players, if you create a product that people absolutely love, they'll use you above huge aggregators.
That's true. So you're more on the side of a more bigger number of businesses, more fragmentation, rather than a few industry giants doing all the streaming. Is that the future you see?
I see fragmentation in terms of the offering, but I see, in my specific industry, consolidation in the sense that we'll probably see textbook publishers merge more and more as there's more difficulty in making textbook publishing work in the modern age.
I mean, this is something really interesting. You've given me a lot to think about, and I think it is same for the audience that listens to us. A lot of very interesting talking points, things that are worth thinking more about in the future as well, regarding the change in streaming, in how we reach content, in how founders build businesses, and how to actually get the timing, the product market fit, the team right, and how to actually manage growth. So I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you for joining this startup sessions. Do you have any final messages for those who are listening out there? If they want to use Perlego, what should they do? Where can they follow you, yourself, or Perlego? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, just Perlego.com, Perlego Books on Twitter, and Perlego on Facebook. But I think my sort of final thought is, if you're ever thinking of launching a business, just get on with it, because you should really not be scared to fail, because you'll always learn something from launching, or trying at least to do it.
So try and learn and fail, and use that failure as the fuel for your growth is, I think, a good point to end on. So perfect. Thank you, Gauthier.
Exactly, you said it much better than me. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for the call, and hopefully talk soon.